Today is January 31st, 2018. We're about ready to launch into a brand new year. And for those of you who've spent a lot of time with me, you know that I have really struggled what to do with this channel. I've struggled with what my role on YouTube is. And the thing that I've walked away with is this idea that YouTube is not my platform. And I still believe that. I feel that my true work is off of YouTube. But right now, it's the only way I have to reach out to anybody. After all, I live in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of cows. So what do I want to do today? Well, a week ago, I told you I was launching a series called Just Walk Away. And that really has been based on this idea of what I've learned over these last now 7 years of living in a very tiny trailer, most of that without plumbing, with limited electricity, with extremely limited resources. And I've learned a lot. This is never how I saw my life going, but I thought maybe what I'll try to do with this channel now is really focus on this idea of what it means to walk away. So when I made that video last week, I had a list of about 17 different things that would be significant causes or reasons that would disrupt people's lives in the first world enough that they wouldn't just be nomadic for pleasure or for a purpose, but rather it would be a refugee status. It would be a real reason why you had to just walk away. And not long after I made that video, I came across some information that literally blew all those 17 reasons out of the water. And whether anybody believes this is true or not, what I'm talking about is a real extinction event. And I know when people say that, they seem crazy. And there's nobody more qualified to diagnose crazy than I am. After all, I've made my living diagnosing crazy. So I have a pretty good grip on reality, but I also have a pretty big background that I never share here on this platform, and actually I never will. But I wanted to share a story about why I think this terminal diagnosis for humanity, this extinction event, will precipitate not just all of us having to walk away, most likely, from everything that we knew. It's not just a physical event. It's not just practical ideas. It's so much deeper and more profound than that. And that's really why I split these two channels. And so I'm going to be talking about those ideas, this idea of how do you walk away when humanity and this earth has a terminal diagnosis. What does that really mean? And the important stuff, the inside stuff, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual components of that idea, the philosophy, the massive amount of trauma and grief, if that was real, that would trigger in an individual. I'm going to be talking about that on the other channel. There's the introductory video I made with the link below. I think it's the most profound statement I've ever come up with in that 5-minute video. If you listen carefully, you'll see the synthesis of everything I've been talking about. And so before we relaunch into this 2019 and we really start to look at what does it mean to be a first world individual forced into a refugee status that we traditionally think about of as third world, I'm not here to try to convince you why any of this is true. I'm just here to explore some of the ideas around what would happen if it's true. And so I wanted to back up for just a moment, and I wanted to tell you this little tiny story about why this is really hitting me in such a big and profound and very real way. His life was so complicated. There were so many things on his plate that I didn't really see any way out for him. I was still young. I was still a young social worker and a therapist. I had basic skills, but I didn't have long-term skills. And I didn't have a way that I could see that I could help him. I didn't have a way that I saw that anybody could help him. And so when he took his life, I really wasn't surprised. I was devastated, but I wasn't surprised because I didn't see any way for him to crawl out of the complexity of the issues and the traumas and the losses, everything that he had within him. And he was an amazing man. He could have been a professional athlete. He was extremely bright. He was kind. He was just an amazing man. But he really did not have a chance from the very beginning with his first traumatic loss as a young child. And so the two things that I really learned from him, from Stephen, was one, that love just wasn't enough. There was no way I could love or we could love each other enough to fix what was going on with him. And when he disappeared for a couple weeks. I spent the whole time not knowing where he was, repeatedly telling people, you know, there's something wrong, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And he would disappear on occasion, so it wasn't out of character, but I just knew in every fiber of my being something was wrong, something's wrong. And everybody told me, just relax, calm down, he'll show up, he'll surface, because he always came back. He always found his way back and contacted me. He never walked away. And I got the phone call, I remember, that I needed to call back. I was in California at the time. I had been living in Phoenix, and I was visiting family in California. And I got the call, and I spoke with someone who knew him. I didn't know him, and he'd been found. He'd committed suicide in his apartment, and he'd been there this whole time. I had just given my key back to him prior to this event, and so I didn't have a way to access his apartment, even though I had been over there and I had knocked on the door. And so all of a sudden, I just knew that I wasn't crazy, that everything that I had been feeling was probably him lurking around, and I wasn't crazy. And what happened to me after that was this moving out of this frustrated, chaotic, frustrated position, because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was, so I didn't know what I could do. I couldn't solve the problem because I didn't know what the problem was. All of a sudden, I settled into the deepest, most profound, and complete sense of peace and calm that I've ever experienced before or since. And the lesson I took from that 3 days was really the idea that love is all there is. And so how do you reconcile those two issues? That love cannot solve every problem. And in the face of great tragedy is the realization that really love is all there is. And I feel like that's exactly what this week has been. That's exactly this moment in time. You've seen me struggle with how to participate in this global conversation and try to talk about love, and when it's only scary headlines that really get any attention. And we're faced with an overwhelming number of problems that cannot be fixed. There's no amount of love that can fix every single problem humanity is facing. Even if none of this extinction event information is true. Like I said, there's 17 different massive ideas out there, from an ice age to earthquake, natural disasters, pandemics, economic collapse. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, that will force us to deal with this problem we've created in our culture and our civilization, whether we want to or not. But it's never been reconciled with this extermination process that we seem to be witnessing, this destruction of our atmosphere, this destruction of our land, the destruction of our physical bodies and our minds, how crazy people are going, how sick we are. We really are a world and a species. Humans are a species that are facing an extinction event with or without an external source. And so when I got a hold of this information, and the links are below to take you to that video and the information to talk about this idea, that when I have been wrestling with this this last week, this profound shift has just happened in the same way it happened after Stephen died. And I knew I was right. I knew I wasn't crazy. Because it's been that frustration has been for me my entire life, knowing that something was happening, knowing that everything that I've learned over the course of my life had a point to it. And I'll be honest with you, I thought that it would have culminated, between 2010, 2012. And when nothing happened, I thought, well, okay, maybe I was wrong. And I sort of let that go. But now the pieces have all pulled together in a way I could never in 1,000 years have imagined that this would be the trajectory, not just for me, not just for you, but for everybody. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that while I don't know if any of this information is true, I do know this. I know that when a human gets a terminal diagnosis, something very profound happens. They either just give up and quit, they go act out into the world, they disassociate, or they deny or distract, they don't want to deal with it. But the fourth thing that happens is something very miraculous happens within. It's this moment when it just everything comes together and you realize what's true, what's important, what matters. And that is that love. And I will also tell you, in the face of terminal diagnosis, the only time true miracles come forward is when the person gets to that point of complete freedom, the absence of fear, the acceptance that my life is finite and that I am not going to pretend like it's not going to happen. I'm not going to fight my way against it. I'm not going to distract and dissociate. I'm going to let that fear go. I'm going to know that whatever happens, I am going to be here in the most strong, powerful, and grace-filled way that I know how. And that is the only time when real miracles move forward. And so I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's real. I don't even believe in a one-world theory. I think that we are multidimensional. I think that there are multiple worlds, parallel realities. So I'm not attached to one narrative. But all I know is the same way that everything came crashing in and crystallized when I found out Stephen was dead. That just happened to me this week in a very powerful way. And so there's two things that I'm going to leave you with about why I'm taking this channel and everything I do in this direction. Because one, if I'm wrong, everybody has a terminal diagnosis. There's no human being in the world that gets to walk away from letting go of that final breath, our physical body and this physical world. And the more fearless and committed you live to life itself, the more powerful your experience in this life is. So I think that even if none of it's true, how you live your life in the face of a terminal diagnosis is the most real and intense and meaningful way that you can ever live. And the second thing is, what if I'm right? And what if I didn't do anything? The question that I knew and I didn't offer all the wisdom and all the experience I've collected over these last 40 years, I think that would be the harder thing to live with. And I'll tell you that when you talk to people on their deathbed, which I have talked to hundreds of people, the thing they regret, two things. One, they regret what they didn't do, not what they did. And they always regret the people. They regret the relationships they neglected. They regret the love they let go. They regret what was important and meaningful. And most of us don't understand what is important and meaningful until we're in the face of a terminal diagnosis. Nobody's getting out of this world alive. So before we go, this idea of just walking away in the face of a terminal diagnosis, when I started to think about this in a very practical way, because I think there's two things happening. There is the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual aspect, which I'll be doing on the other channel. And then there's the physical aspect. So all this time I've been talking about survival road, it's going to get back to a very practical application of what happens when this idea or this information takes hold. What happens when things start to destabilize? If this is real, it will. If it's not real, there's 17 plus other reasons why it will destabilize in a way that is unimaginable. I can't change any of that. All I can do is walk this road with you in a way to think about it in a practical manner. Worst case scenario is you walk away with a new way of thinking about things, a new set of skills, and a new way to manage the crises and the hard things in your life, because there's nothing more powerful than a terminal diagnosis to tell you what's important and when it's time to walk away and what you can let go of. Because the secret to life isn't what you go out and get. It's when you let go of what you don't need and you hold on to what's real and true. You'll know that when you face your own terminal diagnosis with yourself or with somebody you love. All this stuff, all this way of being in the world, it means about this much. We still need to eat, still need a safe place to sleep, and we still need practical things. So we're going to do that over here on this channel. But the real work is going to be over at 18 Cross Road, where I want to dive in with a small group of you and really get into what I'm calling humanity's shepherds and spiritual nomads. Because if this is real, most of us won't survive it. Even though we know we're not going to survive, it's a whole different thing if you have an extinction event. So that's my message to you here on this last day of 2018. I have no idea what's real. I have no idea what's true. All I know is the moment I learned that Stephen was gone, things crystallized. And the moment I heard this explanation of all this data that I've learned over decades, I had that same crystallization. So I hope I'm wrong, but either way, I am committed to walking this road with you as if we had a terminal diagnosis, because that is the most powerful and profound and meaningful way to live this life. And to me, I don't think there's any other way to be here. So the confusion about my YouTube journey is over. Now you can decide if you want to join this part of the journey with me. If you do, I hope you will subscribe. I hope you will look me up over at 18 Cross Road. And as always, we're going to take one old big deep breath, and we are going to see you not just next time, but next year.